After the funeral, Ayan returned to the old house where he had spent his childhood. The place felt frozen in time, untouched by the world outside. Dust floated slowly through thin rays of evening light, and the faint smell of his mother's cooking still lingered in the air. Every object carried a memory. The wooden chair where she used to sit, the ticking wall clock she never allowed to stop, and the neatly folded curtains she washed every Sunday. The silence inside the house felt heavier than grief itself. Ayan walked carefully through each room, almost expecting his mother to call his name from the kitchen as she always did. Her slippers were still placed beside the bed, and her shawl rested on the sofa as if she had just left moments ago. He couldn't bring himself to move anything. Changing the house felt like erasing her existence. As night approached, the atmosphere slowly shifted. The warm familiarity turned into something unsettling. The walls creaked softly, and the wind outside brushed against the windows with a low whispering sound. Ayan tried convincing himself it was only his imagination, a natural reaction to loneliness and loss. Before sleeping, he stood in front of his mother's framed photograph hanging in the hallway. Her gentle smile brought him comfort, yet for a brief moment, he felt as if her eyes were following him. He shook off the thought and turned away. That night, lying alone in his childhood room, Ayan realized the house did not feel empty at all. Instead, it felt occupied, as though someone unseen was quietly moving through the corridors, watching over him in silence. He closed his eyes, unaware that this was only the beginning of something far more mysterious and terrifying waiting inside the house. The first night in the house refused to pass peacefully. Ayan lay awake in his bed, staring at the ceiling while the old clock ticked loudly on the wall. Each second sounded heavier than the last, echoing through the silent rooms. Sleep stayed far from him, replaced by an uneasy feeling he could not explain. Around midnight, a faint metallic sound broke the silence. Clink, clink. It came from the kitchen. Ayan held his breath, listening carefully. The sound repeated, like utensils gently touching each other. At first, he assumed it was the wind or perhaps something falling on its own, but the noises continued in a slow, deliberate rhythm, as if someone was preparing food. His heart began to race. The house was locked from the inside. No one else had keys. Gathering courage, he stepped out of his room and walked toward the hallway. The floor creaked under his feet, making every step feel louder. The kitchen light was off, yet he was certain movement had been there moments ago. When he reached the doorway, the sound suddenly stopped. The kitchen stood perfectly still. Plates were neatly stacked, and nothing appeared disturbed. Ayan checked the windows and the back door, all closed. A cold wave of confusion ran through him. He told himself grief was playing tricks on his mind. As he turned to leave, a soft warmth brushed past him, almost like someone walking by. The air carried a familiar scent, his mother's perfume. He froze, unable to move, overwhelmed by both comfort and fear. Slowly, he whispered, "Emmy?" No answer came. Only silence returned, deeper than before. Yet Ayan felt certain of one thing. He was no longer alone in the house, and whatever shared the space with him knew he was there. Morning light slowly entered the house through the half-open curtains, pulling Ayan out of a restless sleep. For a moment, he forgot everything: the funeral, the strange sounds, the loneliness. But as soon as he sat up, reality returned. The house was quiet again, almost unnaturally calm. Feeling hungry, he walked toward the kitchen, expecting to prepare something simple for himself. However, the moment he stepped inside, he froze. On the dining table sat a freshly prepared breakfast. A cup of warm tea released thin curls of steam into the air, and beside it was a plate of parathas and eggs arranged neatly, exactly the way his mother used to serve him every morning before school. Ayan's hands began to tremble. He was certain he had not cooked anything the night before. Slowly, he touched the cup. It was warm. Someone, or something, had made it recently. His mind searched desperately for a logical explanation. Maybe a relative had visited early in the morning? Maybe he had sleepwalked and prepared it himself? Yet deep inside, he knew neither explanation felt true. The familiar smell filled the room, bringing back countless memories of peaceful mornings and his mother's gentle voice reminding him to eat before leaving home. Emotion mixed with fear as tears gathered in his eyes. He looked around the kitchen carefully. Nothing seemed out of place, yet the atmosphere felt different, protective, almost caring. For a brief moment, he felt comfort instead of terror, as if an unseen presence was trying to take care of him. Suddenly, a chair moved slightly behind him with a soft scraping sound. Ayan turned quickly, but no one stood there. The room was empty again. At that moment, a chilling realization crossed his mind. Whatever was inside the house did not want to harm him. It was watching and quietly continuing his mother's routine. That evening, uneasiness followed Ayan everywhere inside the house. The strange breakfast from the morning kept replaying in his mind. He tried distracting himself by cleaning old shelves and organizing boxes, but the feeling of being watched never faded. Every corner of the house seemed alive with silent attention. As night fell, darkness gathered quickly. The hallway light flickered weakly, casting long shadows across the walls. Ayan avoided looking toward his mother's photograph, which hung at the center of the corridor. Since childhood, that picture had always comforted him, but now it filled him with an unexplainable tension. Around midnight, while passing through the hallway, he noticed something unusual. The shadow beneath the photograph moved slightly, not like a normal shadow reacting to light, but as if it had its own motion. Ayan stopped walking. His breathing slowed as he stared carefully. The house was completely still. No fans were running, no windows were open. Yet the shadow shifted again, stretching along the wall before returning to its original shape. A cold sensation crawled down his spine. He stepped closer to the photograph. His mother's smiling face looked peaceful, unchanged, but the air around the frame felt strangely warm compared to the rest of the house. For a brief second, he felt safe standing there, as if invisible arms surrounded him. Then suddenly, the hallway light dimmed. The shadow behind him grew longer, darker than before, almost separating from the wall. Ayan quickly turned around, but nothing stood there. When he looked back at the photograph, it seemed slightly tilted, though he was sure it had been straight moments earlier. His heart pounded as a thought formed in his mind. Someone was watching him through that picture. And whoever it was, had been there long before he noticed. Exhausted from fear and confusion, Ayan finally fell asleep late that night. His mind drifted into uneasy dreams, where the house appeared darker and endlessly silent. He found himself standing in the hallway, surrounded by shadows that stretched unnaturally along the walls. The air felt heavy, making it difficult to breathe. At the end of the corridor stood his mother. She looked exactly as he remembered her, wearing her simple shawl, her face calm, yet strangely serious. Relief rushed through Ayan as he moved toward her, wanting to speak, wanting to ask if she was truly there. But before he could reach her, she raised her hand gently, signaling him to stop. Her eyes held urgency instead of warmth. In a soft but firm voice, she said, "Do not open the door." The words echoed unnaturally, repeating through the empty hallway. Ayan felt confused. "Which door?" he tried to ask, but no sound came from his mouth. His mother stepped closer, her expression filled with concern. Again she spoke, slower this time. "No matter what you hear, do not open the door." The lights around them flickered, and distant knocking sounds began to echo somewhere inside the dream. Each knock grew louder, more aggressive. Ayan turned toward the sound, but when he looked back, his mother's figure had begun fading into darkness. Fear replaced comfort. He tried running toward her, but the floor beneath him felt endless, stretching farther away with every step. Her final whisper reached him just before everything went black. "Trust me." Ayan suddenly woke up, gasping for air. His room was dark, and sweat covered his face. The clock showed exactly 3 a.m. Then, from somewhere inside the house, a slow knocking sound began. The knocking continued, slow and heavy, echoing through the silent house. Ayan sat frozen on his bed, his heartbeat pounding louder than the sound itself. The clock beside him still read 3 a.m., the same time he had awakened from the dream. His mother's warning repeated inside his mind, "Do not open the door." The knocking came again, this time louder. Thud, thud, thud. It was coming from the main entrance downstairs. Ayan forced himself to stand. Every instinct told him to stay in his room, yet curiosity and fear pulled him toward the hallway. The house felt colder than before, and the air seemed unusually heavy, as if something waited in anticipation. As he slowly walked down the stairs, the knocking stopped. Silence filled the house for a brief moment. Then a soft voice spoke from behind the door. "Ayan, Beta, open the door." His blood turned cold. It was his mother's voice. Gentle, familiar, exactly the way she used to call him. Tears instantly filled his eyes. For a moment, hope replaced fear. Maybe she was really there. Maybe everything had been a mistake. The voice came again, slightly more urgent. Please let me in. Ion stepped closer to the door, his hand trembling as he reached toward the handle. The metal felt icy beneath his fingers. His mind struggled between emotion and reason. Then he remembered the dream. No matter what you hear, do not open the door. The voice outside suddenly changed tone, becoming impatient. The knocking returned, faster and harder than before. The walls vibrated slightly with each strike. Ion, open the door. Fear surged through him. Something felt wrong, deeply wrong. The warmth he associated with his mother was missing. Instead, a strange hostility seeped through the wood. Slowly, he pulled his hand away from the handle, realizing that whatever waited outside was not his mother. Ion stepped back from the door, his breathing uneven. The voice outside continued calling his name, shifting between softness and anger. Each word sounded almost perfect, yet something about it felt hollow, like an imitation struggling to remain convincing. Ion, why are you afraid of me? The voice asked gently. For a moment, guilt filled his chest. The tone sounded hurt, exactly how his mother used to speak when he ignored her. His mind battled against his fear. What if he was wrong? What if she truly needed help? The door handle suddenly rattled violently from the outside. Ion jumped back. The knocking turned aggressive, echoing through the entire house. Pictures on the wall trembled, and dust fell from the ceiling. The calm, loving voice transformed into something strained and unnatural. Let me in. The words dragged unnaturally, as if spoken through multiple overlapping voices. Ion covered his ears, terrified. Tears rolled down his face as memories of his mother clashed with the horrifying reality before him. Then, behind him, the hallway light flickered on by itself. A warm presence filled the space. The air changed, becoming calmer, safer. Ion slowly turned around and saw his mother's photograph glowing faintly on the wall. The shaking inside the house lessened, as though an invisible force was pushing back against whatever stood outside. The violent knocking paused. For a brief moment, silence returned. From beyond the door came a low growl, no longer pretending to be human. Heavy footsteps moved away from the entrance, followed by a deep scraping sound across the wood, like claws dragging slowly along the surface. Ion collapsed onto his knees, trembling. He finally understood the truth. Something had come to the house wearing his mother's voice, and it had almost succeeded in fooling him. The darkness inside the house deepened as Ion sat frozen on the floor, staring at the front door. Outside, the shadows seemed thicker, almost moving on their own. The knocking had stopped, but a terrible presence lingered just beyond the wood, breathing cold air through the cracks. Every instinct screamed at him, "Don't open it." Suddenly, the hallway lights went out completely, plunging the house into pitch-black silence. Ion's heart raced uncontrollably. He fumbled toward the kitchen counter, his hands brushing against familiar objects, but they offered no comfort. The shadows seemed to stretch and twist along the walls, forming shapes that resembled a figure standing at the window. It was taller than any human should be, its outline distorted and unnatural. Then he saw it, two glowing eyes staring directly at him from the corner of the living room. The eyes were filled with a strange, malevolent intelligence. Ion wanted to scream, but no sound came out. The figure began moving slowly toward him, its movements jerky yet deliberate, like a puppet controlled by some unseen hand. The air around him grew colder, carrying a faint, familiar scent. His mother's perfume. Ion froze, torn between terror and hope. Could it really be her? Or had something evil taken her voice and her scent to lure him? As the figure approached the window, it stopped and tilted its head unnaturally, mimicking his mother's posture. Ion's mind raced. This was not his mother. The warmth and love he remembered were missing. Only a dark imitation remained, watching him with intent. He stumbled backward, almost tripping over the rug, and his eyes caught the photograph of his mother on the wall. It glowed faintly again, as if responding to the dark presence. Ion realized the terrifying truth. Whatever was outside had taken his mother's image and voice, but inside the house, her protection was still alive, silently guarding him. The figure outside hissed softly, then vanished into the shadows, leaving Ion trembling in the dim, protective glow of his mother's presence. The photograph of his mother had fallen to the floor with a soft thud, and a whisper filled the air. "I am protecting you." Ion froze, staring at the image lying face up on the wooden floor. The warmth of the whisper contrasted sharply with the icy fear lingering from the presence outside. It was a voice he could feel rather than hear, calm yet powerful, flowing through the house like a protective barrier. He knelt beside the photo, trembling. The air around him seemed alive, pulsating gently with unseen energy. Every shadow in the room appeared to bow away, retreating from the glowing presence that radiated from the photograph. Ion's fear didn't vanish, but it transformed into awe and cautious relief. Someone, or something, was here for him. Then he heard it, soft footsteps moving around the house, but not the clumsy, threatening ones from before. These steps were measured, deliberate, almost comforting. They passed through the hallway and stopped near the staircase. Ion followed the sound with his eyes, but saw nothing. Yet the feeling of safety intensified. He realized the truth. His mother's spirit, or a fragment of it, had not left him after death. She had stayed behind, silently observing, ready to intervene whenever danger approached. The voice from the photograph was her warning, her presence, her shield against the unknown. Ion felt tears stream down his face as the realization sank in. He was not alone. His mother had become more than a memory. She had become a guardian. The house, once a place of fear, now felt like a vessel of protection. As dawn approached, a soft light filled the room. The shadows had retreated completely, leaving only the gentle glow of the photograph. Ion whispered, "Thank you, Amy," knowing that even in death, she would always watch over him. The house was safe, but the world beyond the walls still held unknown terrors. Yet he no longer felt powerless. By morning, silence had returned to the house. The knocking, the shadows, and the eerie voices had vanished. Ion sat on the edge of his bed, exhausted, his body still trembling from the night's terror. The house seemed ordinary now, bathed in soft sunlight filtering through the curtains, yet a lingering tension clung to the air. He cautiously walked to the front door, expecting emptiness, but stopped cold when he saw the deep claw marks etched across the wood. The scratches were jagged, almost unnatural, as if something immense had tried to force its way in. Ion's heart skipped a beat. Whoever, or whatever, had come last night had not fully succeeded. Glancing around, he noticed the house was intact, undisturbed except for the photograph of his mother, now placed neatly on the table as if nothing had happened. A faint warmth radiated from it, and he felt a strange calm wash over him. The protective presence he had sensed throughout the night lingered, invisible yet undeniable. Ion realized that his mother's spirit had not just been a memory, a fleeting vision, or a dream. She had actively defended him, even after death. She had confronted whatever dark force had sought to deceive him with her voice, her scent, and her image, creating a barrier between him and the malevolent presence outside. For the first time since returning to the house, Ion felt safe. Yet, the claw marks on the door reminded him that danger still lurked beyond the walls, patient and relentless. He understood now that the world contained horrors he could not control, but inside the house, his mother's spirit would always watch over him. He whispered a silent promise. He would respect her warnings, heed her protection, and never forget that even in death, she had become his guardian. The house was quiet, the morning bright, but Ion knew the shadows of the night had not fully disappeared. They had merely been kept at bay by his mother's enduring love.